Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are tackling some really difficult source material, stuff that forces us to look squarely at official narratives.
Yeah, and consider some deeply uncomfortable questions, about the nature of power itself.
Exactly. And look, this isn't just about vague speculation. We're examining specific arguments, specific frameworks from analysis that starts from a very stark premise.
Yes.
That malfeasance, we're talking claims of staged attacks, cover-ups, even outright murder, might not be some rare exception.
But potentially a policy tool, used at the highest levels.
That's the operating assumption in the source material we're dissecting today.
Okay, so it's really crucial for you, the listener, to understand our role here. Our mission is purely analytical.
Absolutely.
When we talk about sources like Rowe's analysis, which, let's be honest, deals with extreme claims, we have to stay strictly impartial.
We aren't endorsing these conclusions, not at all.
No. We're here just to unpack the specific logic, the historical basis, the theoretical framework he uses to connect these particular dots.
Right. If you want to understand how these theories get built, you have to look at the architecture of the arguments themselves.
You need to see the blueprint, so to speak.
Precisely. So this deep dive is about distilling that specific calculus, the kind of thinking used by this school of thought.
We're looking at sources focused on, well, government conspiracy theories, the alleged role of psychopathy in leadership.
And the mechanism by which false flag operations are supposedly, implemented and even rationalized.
And Rose, the source we're focusing on, starts by setting a kind of benchmark,
Yeah.
a documented historical precedent.
One that he argues basically lowers the ethical bar permanently for what government could be capable of.
So let's get into that framework, because the analysis really kicks off by trying to prove that the unthinkable has, in fact, been thought and documented by U.S. leadership, no less.
Right.
The historical foundation Rose built his entire case on is Operation Northwoods.
Northwoods, yeah.
It serves as the anchor point for his whole theory. It provides well-documented evidence that high-ranking officials were genuinely willing to trade American lives for political outcomes.
That name, Operation Northwoods, it definitely carries a heavy weight. For listeners who maybe only know the name vaguely, what's the absolute core detail? Why is it so foundational for this kind of analysis?
Okay, so Operation Northwoods wasn't just one plan. It was a collection of proposals drafted back in the early 1960s.
Why?
By the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, the most senior uniformed military leaders in the U.S.
Wow. Okay.
It was a Cold War thing, obviously.
Yeah.
And it was never executed, thankfully. President Kennedy rejected it.
Kennedy shut it down.
Yes. But crucially, it was developed. It was approved at the highest military levels. That's the key point Rose makes.
And the purpose of these proposals, it's horrific. The idea was to commit acts of terror against American citizens and American assets.
That's right. We really need to get into the specifics here, because Rose uses the details of this plan to kind of shock the listener, to make you reconsider what might be possible today.
So what were they actually proposing?
The goal was clear: creating overwhelming public support for invading Cuba, getting rid of Castro.
And how are they going to manufacture that support?
Through incredibly specific, detailed schemes to fake Cuban attacks. For instance, one idea was destroying a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay. Blame it on Cuba.
Okay, a classic provocation.
But it gets worse. Another really disturbing proposal involved faking the downing of a civilian airliner, a chartered plane carrying American college students, flying from the U.S. to South America.
Wait. Faking the downing of a plane full of American students? How would they hide that the students weren't actually killed by Cuba?
The source material confirms the plan was chillingly detailed. It involved a swap.
A swap.
They'd charter a real plane, fill it with students, then, while it's on the ground, supposedly, swap it out for an identical military drone replica.
A drone painted to look like the airliner.
Exactly. Then they'd fly the drone out and crash it remotely off the coast, make it look like an unprovoked Cuban missile attack or whatever.
And the real students?
The plan was they'd land safely, somewhere quiet, their disappearance kept under wraps just long enough.
Long enough to whip up international outrage? Justify an invasion?
Yes. The sheer complexity, the cold-blooded calculation involved, that's what Rose hammers home.
So that level of institutional deception, that willingness to sacrifice civilians, that's the precedent.
Right.
Rose's conclusion, then, it's analytical. He says, look, if the most powerful military minds once formally endorsed plans to murder American students to start a war,
Then what does that tell you about the ethical guardrails on power today?
it changes the whole conversation, doesn't it?
Fundamentally. Rose argues Northwoods proves the capability exists, and the historical appetite for this kind of thing. If official bodies capable of this scale of planning have already endorsed sacrificing citizens for geopolitical goals,
Then we, the public, are maybe profoundly naive if we assume today's government is somehow ethically superior or just incapable of similar actions.
the bar for what's acceptable state violence, according to this source, has already been documented, and it's shockingly low.
Okay, let's connect this straight to his core thesis, the psychopathic element he brings up.
Yeah.
The average person hears about Northwoods, the student plane swap, and they recoil. Just horrified disbelief.
And that recoil, Rose argues, is exactly the cognitive barrier. It's what stops us, he claims, from recognizing similar actions if they happen now.
Because it's just too awful to contemplate.
Rose posits that this inability, this difficulty even imagining such calculated cruelty, the plane swap idea, is a fundamental flaw in how the public perceives power.
If you have a basic moral compass,
You will always underestimate the capabilities of those who allegedly don't. The source claims the reason these plans were even dreamt up and written down is because there are individuals in power whose moral compass is entirely driven by one thing: utility.
usefulness, what works?
Right. For the psychopath, as Rose defines them in this power context, human lives aren't sacred. They're just inputs, political assets, or collateral damage in a cost-benefit analysis.
So if the calculation says murder is beneficial,
Then murder is the rational choice. This initial mention of psychopathy sets the stage for why the modern false flags, the ones we're about to look at, are often designed, according to Rose, to leverage our disbelief.
how so?
Well, if the public believes deep down that their leaders could not do such a thing,
Then the leaders are essentially free to do it.
pretty much, knowing the public will supply its own cognitive defenses, they'll accept almost any official story, no matter how flimsy, because the alternative is too terrifying to face.
So Rose uses that historical foundation, that alleged institutional willingness, to analyze what he claims are modern staged events, events designed for specific political utility.
Exactly. And the first case study he presents is the reported shooting at an ICE facility.
Okay. What was the official story there?
The official incident recap was undeniably tragic. A shooter supposedly fired into an immigration and customs enforcement facility
ICE. Right.
and reportedly killed 2 immigrants who were being detained there. The narrative that formed very quickly was that this was politically motivated violence, an attack on a federal agency.
Okay. Seems straightforward enough on the surface, but Rose zeroes in on something specific.
Yes. One very specific, and he argues, highly suspect detail reported in the immediate aftermath.
And that detail, the supposed fingerprint of staging, is what?
It's the alleged discovery of a bullet casing near the scene.
Okay.
And supposedly, written clearly on this spent casing were the words anti-icy.
Anti-ice, written on a bullet casing.
Yes. That specific detail, according to Rose, is the perfect example of a contrived clue. It's something so neat, so helpful to the official story that it should immediately ring alarm bells for anyone thinking in terms of utility like we just discussed.
He calls this detail laughably staged, compares it to 10-year-olds trying to pull off a false flag. That's pretty strong language.
It is. But what's the substance behind that ridicule? Why does he find that casing so unbelievable?
Yeah, what's the logic?
It boils down to tradecraft versus utility. Rose argues a genuine attacker hitting a powerful state target is usually one of two things: either highly trained and focused on getting away clean.
Or maybe irrational, focused on chaos, not messaging.
Exactly. Neither profile, in his view, would take the time or risk leaving such blatant, incriminating evidence by writing a cartoonishly simple political slogan on a tiny piece of brass.
Brass that has to be ejected, fall somewhere, then be found and carefully analyzed.
Right. It's an unnecessary complication that removes all doubt. A real killer might try to escape or maybe leave a complex manifesto somewhere else, but anti-IC on the casing itself.
It simplifies everything instantly for the police and the media, pinpoints the motive immediately.
Rose claims this lack of subtlety is the tell. It wasn't meant for careful investigators, it was meant for headlines. The logic of disbelief here is that the clue is just too perfect.
It guarantees immediate capture of the narrative.
And guarantees the official story, that critics of ICE are dangerous, violent extremists, is locked in instantly. For Rose, this looks like a calculated choice. Prioritize the political message over believable reality.
Okay, so let's follow Rose's theory purely for argument's sake. If the clue is manufactured, we have to ask the next question, the critical one for his analysis. Utility. Cui bono, who benefits?
And the utility analysis here is just devastatingly cynical. Rose points out who were the victims.
Immigrants. Detainees.
Conveniently, immigrants. In this specific situation, Rose argues that outcome actually served to neutralize public sympathy for the victims themselves.
How so?
Because the focus immediately jumped to the unprovoked attack on a federal agency, on IC. The story wasn't about the people killed, it was about the attack on the institution.
So instead of seeing victims who might be fleeing violence, seeking asylum, the main emotional beneficiary of the tragedy becomes IC itself.
Precisely. The outcome allowed ICE, an agency facing significant public criticism at the time about its methods, to instantly portray itself as the victim of ideological terrorism.
And that manufactured victimhood, it justifies a reaction.
Right. And what does Rose claim was the ultimate role of this alleged staging?
What was the desired outcome?
The allegation is stark. A government operation designed to immediately, decisively discredit all legitimate criticism of IC.
By linking criticism to violence.
Exactly. Pinning the violence on a clear anti-IC message meant the narrative could suggest anyone critical of the agency was somehow aligned with, or maybe even complicit in, violence and extremism.
So the goal was manufacture sympathy for the agency.
Which then justifies bigger budgets, more security, more aggressive enforcement powers, greater political control. It effectively shuts down public scrutiny of its actual policies and operations.
And Rose emphasizes the absurdity of the clue. The casing is almost a necessary trade-off.
Yes, a necessary trade-off for the huge utility gained in justifying a crackdown and silencing critics.
That's a key point for you, the listener, to grapple with here. The source claims the goal isn't to fool sharp observers.
No, not at all. It's to provide a narrative so simple, so compelling, that the majority of the public who are looking for comfort and easy answers accept it without question.
So for the psychopathic calculation, as Rose defines it,
the outcome, more security discredited opponents, is way more valuable than making the incident itself look plausible to a few skeptical people. They sacrifice believability to get maximum political leverage.
Okay, the ICE shooting analysis focused on protecting an institution. The second case study Rose brings up is different. It's a hypothetical scenario about the death of a well-known political figure, Charlie Kirk.
Right. This one shifts the focus to how a false flag could, allegedly, be used to manage, divide, and control political dissent itself.
And what makes this premise interesting is that Kirk is, well, a major conservative figure.
Exactly. It cuts across the usual partisan assumptions. Rose argues that Kirk, hypothetically, in the time leading up to this scenario, had supposedly started questioning certain fundamental official narratives.
Which ones?
He specifically mentions Kirk discussing things like the influence of Israel's ruling class and his apparent willingness to dig into the Epstein files, things that step outside typical partisan talking points.
So the alleged danger wasn't his Republican affiliation. It was that he was willing to question the establishment itself, regardless of party.
That's what Rose source material identifies as the ultimate unifying danger, you see. While alive and questioning entrenched power, Kirk was supposedly bringing together a diverse group, conservatives, libertarians, independent media types.
People across party lines.
Yes. All focused on questioning the centralized ruling class, as Rose puts it. And he argues that this kind of cross-aisle solidarity is the single biggest threat to centralized power.
Something the power structure wants to prevent or fracture.
Actively seeks to prevent and fracture, yes.
Okay, so if the goal is to break up that kind of dissent, then an assassination, tragically, becomes a high-utility tool in this framework.
A very high-utility tool.
Let's explore the three specific political utilities Rose claims would be gained by, hypothetically, killing Kirk and blaming it on, say, the other side.
Okay, the first and maybe the most obvious utility is fueling loyalty.
How does that work?
Rose sees martyrdom as an incredibly powerful political weapon. Killing Kirk would instantly silence his living critique of the establishment.
Right. Stops the questioning.
And instead turns him into a symbol. A martyr that the existing Republican Party machine could then grab onto. They could use his sacrifice to demand loyalty to the party structure, rather than letting him continue as a voice, challenging that structure from within, perhaps.
Okay, solidify the base around the party, not the independent critique. What's the second utility?
Classic divide and conquer. Deepening division. If Kirk's death could be successfully blamed on the left, maybe Antifa, maybe liberal activists, maybe even some foreign progressive group, doesn't matter who specifically.
It would create a massive rift.
A massive maybe irreconcilable rupture in American society and politics. This is a core function of the false flag, according to Rose's theory. Keep the public fighting each other.
Focused horizontally, not vertically.
Exactly. The more division, the less chance the public unifies and looks up towards the people allegedly pulling the strings. All the anger, all the hatred gets directed sideways.
Okay. And the third, utility. This one sounds particularly dark based on the outline.
Yeah, this one speaks to the alleged operational efficiency of this psychopathic approach. Censorship justification.
Using his death to justify censorship.
Rose finds this incredibly cynical. Kirk's death, especially if blamed on a politically motivated hate crime, could be instantly exploited. Used to push for huge increases in online censorship, surveillance, new regulations.
Especially against political opponents, presumably.
Of course. And the irony, as Rose points out, is just staggering.
Yeah.
The establishment would be using the death of someone known for speaking out against censorship.
To cement the very control mechanisms he opposed.
Yes. The political utility simply overrides any pretense of respecting what the person actually believed or stood for.
It's purely about maximizing political benefit and control. Truth, ethics. Irrelevant in this calculation.
According to the source, yeah.
Now, even if we set aside the explicit false flag claim for a moment, Rose also dismisses the hypothetical official story of the murder itself. He argues any cover-up would inevitably contain impossible details.
This is a key forensic point in Rose's framework. He argues whenever a powerful group is hiding the truth, the story they cook up has to contain details that don't quite make sense. Scientifically, logically.
Why?
Because they're engineering a narrative to fit a predetermined conclusion, not following the actual evidence. So things get forced, details become physically impossible.
And does Rose give a specific example of an impossible detail in this hypothetical Kirk scenario?
Yes. He specifically attacks the likely ballistics and medical reports that would come out after such a high-profile death. He mentions a hypothetical claim, for instance, that Kirk's spine somehow managed to stop a high-caliber rifle round.
And Rose says that's impossible.
He calls it a bald-faced lie. Physically, medically impossible, he claims. That detail, according to Rose, would only be put out there because the real facts, maybe the type of weapon used, the angle, the skill of the shooter, have to be hidden to protect the real killers.
So the source argues that we, the public, need to train ourselves to spot these absurd details in official reports, details that violate basic physics or common sense.
Yes. Because that absurdity, he claims, is like a fingerprint, a predictable sign of official deception that's designed for mass consumption, not rigorous scrutiny.
It basically forces you, the listener, to realize you're being asked to just stop thinking critically.
Right. If the system needs you to accept physically impossible facts, it's betting that your psychological need for comfort will win out over your critical thinking. Okay, we really need to circle back now and spend some serious time on the core engine, the thing driving Rose's entire theory.
Which is his definition of the functional psychopaths supposedly in leadership roles.
Exactly. And Rose is very clear here. He's not talking about a clinical mental health diagnosis you'd find in the DSM.
No.
No, it's more like a defined personality profile, one that operates, allegedly, entirely without ethical constraints, right inside the machinery of state power.
So how does Rose functionally define these people, the ones allegedly wielding this extreme power? What's the key trait that lets them authorize a Northwoods or stage an ICE shooting, according to him?
The absolute core trait is total indifference.
Indifference.
Complete indifference to the life, death, suffering, or well-being of other people. The only metric that matters in their decision-making, Rose argues, is the outcome, the maximum utility that benefits their centralized goals.
So life is just a relentless, cold calculation for them.
Yes, and anything or anyone that gets in the way of that calculation, including human life, is simply expendable.
That endurance then leads to what you called situational morality earlier. They have to be able to mask this, right?
Oh, absolutely. Rose goes into detail on this. This personality type isn't necessarily walking around snarling all the time. Not overtly evil in public.
No.
If acting friendly or compassionate, or even moral, helps them achieve their goal, gets them resources, influence, votes, they'll put on that mask flawlessly.
But only as long as it's useful.
The instant those friendly behaviors stop being useful, they pivot. Without a flicker of remorse, they will commit murder, authorize war crimes, stage false flags, the second that action becomes the most efficient path to their objective.
Morality is just another tool in the toolbox for them, not a boundary.
Exactly. A tool they use, not a constraint they obey.
And this ruthless, purely utilitarian mindset, Rose argues, is the only explanation for why we supposedly see these continuous extreme measures. False flags, constant propaganda to manufacture consent, the casual dismissal of human life, whether it's foreign or domestic.
Yes, the end always justifies the means. That's the core logic.
To make this concrete, Rose gives a specific and quite charged example involving former President Trump. Not to make a partisan point, but purely to illustrate this alleged psychopathic ability to cause harm and then openly admit it.
That's right. It's used to highlight the alleged lack of remorse and accountability.
What is that specific war crimes example he uses? How does it ground this theoretical definition?
Rose points to accusations that Donald Trump openly committed war crimes, specifically ordering the killing of Iranian civilians at sea under what Rose calls extremely flimsy pretenses.
Citing specific incidents, rules of engagement violations.
Yes, alleged violations leading directly to civilian deaths. But the crucial detail for Rose's argument isn't just the alleged act itself. It's the leader's behavior afterwards.
What about it?
Rose claims the leader then brags about it in public.
Why is the bragging part so critical to his point about psychopathy and power?
For Rose, that public boasting is the ultimate confirmation. It shows a complete lack of remorse. It's not just political bluster. It's an open signal that the value of the political gain from the act, maybe projecting strength, maybe a tactical goal, totally outweighs any moral concern for the lives lost.
So the system itself, Rose argues, has adapted to this mindset.
To the point where leaders feel empowered, maybe even feel obligated to show off their lack of constraint, as if it's proof they're fit to command.
Okay. So if we accept, just for the sake of understanding this analysis, that this psychopathic profile is functional at the highest levels of government, the general warning Rose issues becomes a direct challenge, a challenge to the listener's own sense of safety.
It's a direct challenge to civic trust, to naivety. Rose concludes, if leaders are demonstrably willing to murder foreigners for convenience or political gain, which the source argues happens all the time,
then it's a dangerous delusion for citizens to believe those same leaders would magically draw a line at killing their own citizens.
especially when killing citizens might prove politically useful for maintaining power, consolidating control, eliminating dissent.
The moral threshold for murder has already been crossed in this view.
Right. For the pure utility calculator, the difference between a foreign life and a domestic life becomes negligible. If the utility gained from the domestic action, say, silencing a critic or justifying a crackdown, is high enough, the calculation is the same.
This whole analysis, claiming leaders are calculating psychopaths who kill for utility, it's profoundly disturbing.
It really is.
It asks people to accept possibilities that basically shatter their whole view of the world, their trust in institutions.
Right.
So let's get into Rose's explanation for why the public so often rejects these uncomfortable ideas. Even when faced with what he claims are suspicious details, like that bullet casing, why is there such a huge fundamental resistance to believing this stuff?
Rose argues it comes down to psychological self-defense, a cognitive bias that shields us from existential terror, meaning it is simply too difficult, too terrifying for most people to admit that the authority figures, the institutions they count on for safety, for stability, for the basic structure of society, might actually be murderous, calculating entities.
Believing your government operates on a calculus of murder, it creates unbearable anxiety, doesn't it?
Totally. It forces you into a complete violent rejection of the established order. It means you have to accept total responsibility for your own survival in a world where authority can't be trusted. That's terrifying.
And that difficulty, that terror, leads directly to Rose's explanation for how false narratives manage to succeed.
Exactly. The cognitive bias becomes the mechanism for their success. Citizens forced to choose between facing that terrifying truth about their leader's immorality
And accepting a more palatable, stabilizing story.
will overwhelmingly choose the latter. They accept the absurd lies presented in official narratives.
And that's where the planned absurdity we talked about comes back in. The official story, even if it has impossible details, the anti-IC casing, the impossible ballistics.
It provides comfort, stability. It lets the individual stay safely within the accepted social structure. It helps them avoid the terrifying isolation of thinking their leaders are monsters.
So the absurdity of the lie doesn't actually matter.
Not according to Rose. What matters is the utility of the lie. Its function as a psychological tool for maintaining comfort and social cohesion. That's what guarantees its immediate acceptance by most people. The function is stability, not truth.
Now, crucially, Rose is careful not to limit the psychological manipulation to just one political side, right? He emphasizes the threat is nonpartisan.
Absolutely. His closing warning really stresses analytical impartiality. He alleges that both Republicans and Democrats harbor, promote, and elevate leaders who fit this psychopathic profile. Leaders who would murder their own citizens if it gave them enough political leverage.
So it's not a Republican plot or a Democratic plot in his view.
No, it's a systemic selection process, something inherent to centralized, unchecked authority itself.
The threat is systemic. It lives in the concentration of power, regardless of the party flag being waved.
Which leads to Rose's call to action for the public.
Yeah.
Recognize this nonpartisan nature.
Hmm.
Stop viewing potential malfeasance through a purely partisan lens.
Because if you believe my team is inherently good and their team is the source of all evil.
You'll just keep getting manipulated. You'll end up empowering the very psychopathic profile that views all citizens, regardless of their politics, as equally expendable tools for grabbing and holding power.
And that recognition brings us to the ultimate, really stark warning Rose issues about what it takes to reach and maintain power at that extreme level.
Yeah, his final conclusion is bleak. He argues that wielding power at the very top requires a prerequisite willingness.
Yeah.
A willingness to do things that ordinary moral people find literally unthinkable.
Meaning, if you possess fundamental human constraints.
Conscience, empathy, a genuine belief in the sanctity of life. Rose claims you'll be filtered out by the system. The machinery of absolute power is designed, he alleges, to select for those who lack those constraints, because they're the only ones capable of the necessary ruthlessness. The ruthlessness required to govern without real accountability when push comes to shove. Hashtag Hedge outro.
Okay. We have definitely covered some extremely challenging ground in this deep dive. Let's just quickly try to synthesize the framework Rose's analysis puts forward. Tie together the three core claims we hit.
Right. We started with a historical precedent, Operation Northwoods. For Rose, that established the institutional capability for government false flags against its own people.
Documented capability.
Documented. Then we looked at the alleged mechanics of modern staging, the ICE incident where the absurd clue supposedly maximized political utility.
In the hypothetical Kirk scenario, illustrating how dissent could be managed and fractured through alleged assassination for political gain.
And tying it all together is the alleged role of psychopathy in leadership. That mindset of total indifference, prioritizing utility and outcome above any moral or legal limits, both at home and abroad.
So the main takeaway for you, the listener, it's really about focusing on the structure of the claim, isn't it?
Exactly. Whether you accept Rose's specific conclusions about these modern incidents or not, understanding how this framework is built is crucial for critical thinking.
How so?
It trains you to analyze every official narrative by asking two pretty chilling questions. First, what utility does this specific outcome serve? And second, who benefits most from the particular absurdity, if any, presented in the official story?
That completely shifts your focus away from just the emotional reaction to an event.
And towards the analytical outcome, the political mechanics behind it. It forces a necessary, maybe uncomfortable, look at the alleged nature of centralized power itself.
Okay.
So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought drawn directly from Rose's analysis. If accepting absurd lies is rooted in the deep discomfort of facing a terrifying truth about power, what event, what contradiction, what single impossible detail would have to occur to finally cross your personal threshold? The point where you abandon the comfort of the official narrative for the potentially uncomfortable reality of critical examination.
Something to think about. We'll leave that thought with you. Until the next deep dive.